Today, we become legends.
The addition of active items into Smite 2 is one of the major shakeups that made the game different from its predecessor. Smite has always had relics which were literally called active items for a large part of the game's history, but with Smite 2 they've shaved down the relic system to just 5 options compared to over a dozen in Smite 1, and you can instead build active items directly into your 6-item build and map them to whatever keys or buttons you want. Originally there was no limit to this, but they have since introduced a 3 active item limit, which sorta brings me to the core point of this video. That limit is really only imposed because of one role, the support. Every other role is buying active items at an insanely low rate compared to passive items. There is a certain level of underpurchasing that you might expect due to active items inherently being more situational than most passive items, as well as players just not being familiar with the right situation to use a lot of these actives. But surely it's just those filthy casuals who aren't good enough at the game yet to use active items properly, right? Well, not really. If we take a look at the recent Road to Vegas playoffs from the Founders series, where the best talent Smite 2 has to offer is pushing the game to its limits, here are the stats of the top 9 active items by usage. We can see that Talisman of Purification, the AoE team beats active, is picked up a lot on over 30% of players. There's then a steep drop off to Pharaoh's Curse, the AoE team slow and attack speed slow, being built in 14.5% of builds. Then another large drop off to Sunbeam Bow, the toggle item that drains mana but adds 2 projectiles to the size of your basic attacks, and Circe's Hexstone, the item that turns you into a boar, charges you forward and knocks up enemies, at 6.7% and 5.2% of builds respectively. Then we fall off even further to the next 5 items in Staff of Myrddin, Screeching Gargoyle, Amanita Charm, Pribwind and Eye of Providence, which all sit at around 2% usage. All other active items saw even less usage than these. When we compare this to the top 9 passive items, it's just not even close. Sure, Talisman of Purification beats out every passive item in the game, and Pharaoh's Curse is about on par with most. After that though, we just see dramatically less usage of every other active item compared to most passive items. Now again, as I said at the start of the video, it actually makes a lot of sense to see lower usage on actives because they're situational and have a 3-item hard limit. So an even split of passive and active items is literally both teams building the maximum possible active items every single game. You physically can't have a situation where actives see more use than passives, and I don't think we want that situation anyway. That would be way too chaotic for my liking. That said, there is a middle ground that can be found here, and I think at the moment active items are seeing far too little use compared to passive items outside of this top 2 of Beads and Pharaoh's Curse. This is especially apparent when you look at the role distribution, where only solo laners and supports are building active items even somewhat consistently. Every other role averages around 0.3 active items per build, or roughly 1 in every 3 games an active item is picked up in these roles. And this is in pro play, where there is a massive incentive to use whatever is best, and these players won't have issues maximizing their actives and remembering to use them. In casual play, these numbers are almost certainly a lot worse due to less optimization of these effects and more players who aren't used to pressing those extra buttons in a team fight yet. Basically, this is the absolute optimal environment for active items to thrive, and only 2 of them out of the 25 total are being built consistently, and those 2 are literally just relic effects from Smite 1. Even in pro play, it's super early and we're still in an alpha, so there is probably some element of discovery still happening here, and we might see active usage go up over time. But I do think active items on the whole need to be looked at, as so much more can be done with the system. Yes, having stuff like Talisman of Purification, Pharaoh's Curse, Amanita Charm, etc. that are just copy-paste of Smite 1 relics is important. But I also think looking into more unique effects that almost act like a mini 5th ability or majorly change the way you play is going to be essential if active items are to succeed. As it stands, a lot of actives in the game are just boring press this and get a buff style items that don't really feel good to use. Why would I buy an item that gives me a temporary buff of stats when I could just buy a passive item that's always useful? We need more actives in the vein of Circe's Hexstone, Staff of Myrddin and Sunbeam Bow, and less in the vein of Avatar's Parashu, Dreamer's Idol and Hide of the Nemean Lion. Also, while I think tanks will always lean towards active items more than damage dealers will, there needs to be a serious look at creating some more interesting actives that damage dealers actually feel good buying. Because at the moment, supports buy them often, and that will likely always be the case, solo laners buy them semi-often, but damage rolls almost never do. I don't think active items need to be bought on damage dealers on the level of supports, but maybe on the level of solo laners where on average you pick up 1 active item per build would be a good balance for them. Sometimes you might not pick up an active item at all, sometimes you might even pick up 2, but I think an average of 1 per build is about right. Because even as it is at the moment, even in the highest echelon echelon of play, damage rolls are buying active items once every 3 builds, or to put it another way, they're buying 1 active item for every 17 passive items. And as mentioned, this is likely way more skewed towards passive items for the more casual player base. Many other MOBAs have an active item system and have had it far longer than Smite 2 has been around, so here's a few examples of actually interesting active items that I dug up from other MOBAs that should be used as the standard for Smite 2. Knight's Vow from League of Legends tethers you to an ally and redirects 12% of the damage they take to you, and you heal for 10% of the damage the ally deals. Of course, this probably shouldn't be directly added to Smite 2 because it's too similar to Aphrodite's gimmick, but it's a good example of a truly unique and game-changing active effect that's not just a stat boost. Manta Style from Dota 2 creates 2 mirror images of yourself that last for 20 seconds, deal 1/3 of your damage, and take 300% damage. Again, probably not something to directly add to Smite 2 because it shares too much design space with Danzaburou's new passive, but this is the kind of stuff that makes active items really exciting, for me at least. Of course, we should still have some simpler ones like just a team beads or team heal or gain massive attack speed for a few seconds, stuff like that. But I do think we are lacking some genuinely exciting and game-changing active items at the moment in the vein of Cersei's Hexstone, and that's part of the reason why actives are just not being bought right now. Of course, it's not the only reason, as we discussed in this video, and some really interesting active items like Septo of Dominion and Lifebinder still have insanely low pick rates despite being really interesting in my opinion and having huge potential to make plays. This data is very outdated, but Smite 2.live was collecting item usage data up until around the 24/7 launch, and Lifebinder and Septo of Dominion were both in the bottom 5 of items by purchase rate. At least from the games that I watched, they were never picked up in the Founders series either. So making active items more interesting is just one piece of the puzzle. I do think some of the buffs made recently that reduced active item cooldowns have been really impactful in boosting their usage, because not only does it make them strictly more powerful, it also makes them more fun as you can press them more often, and it even helps out a little bit with casual players remembering to actually use them if you're using them once every minute instead of once every 3 minutes. Pharaoh's Curse, far and away the second most popular active after beads, has a cooldown of only 40 seconds, which I think is definitely contributing to its usage as it's up in every single fight and sometimes even twice per fight with a very powerful effect. I think the top 3 actives by usage from Founders are a great example of the 3 ways that actives can be made attractive to players. You have Talisman of Purification, which is just too powerful and unique not to have. Pharaoh's Curse, which has a very low active cooldown and makes a big impact for that reason. And you have Cersei's Hexstone as well, which is one of the more crazy 5th ability type of effects that's super fun to use and also pretty damn powerful. Having an extra mobility and CC in a fight can be game changing. I also do think making active item stats more competitive with passive items is another way they could go. Cersei's is a good example of this as it has 400 health and 10 cooldown rate, which is pretty solid base stats considering it has such a powerful active effect. They've been trying this approach quite a bit lately with buffs to items like Avatar's Parashu and Amanita Charm and Bloodforge to give them more competitive base stats. And while I do think I prefer reworking the boring active effects and reducing the cooldown of the interesting ones, I think that's probably a better way to go, as it preserves the actual trade-off of buying an active versus a passive. Some active items really do just have awful base stats that make them pretty much unjustifiable in a build, especially when paired with a long cooldown that might only make an impact once every 2 or 3 fights. So yeah, in conclusion, active items will always be lower in pick rate than passive items, and that's perfectly fine and how it should be in my opinion. But as they are at the moment, their purchase rate is way too low, even when considering that you can count the number of active items with even a semi-decent pick rate on one hand. And it's really just 2 that are being built consistently out of the 25 total. Making more interesting effects, lowering their cooldowns and improving their base stats, as well as just giving people time to adjust to using them optimally, should hopefully give the active item system the love it truly deserves in Smite 2. What are your thoughts though? Are you a frequent builder of active items and love the system, or do you not build them at all, either due to thinking they're weak or not being used to them yet? Let me know down below and I'll catch you guys for another one later on. Have a great day and peace out, you nerds.